Beginning list number 10 is Evan Almighty. The movie was meant to be a sequel spin-off of Jim Carrey's hit Bruce Almighty, but this time Steve Carell took the lead and told the story of a congressman named Evan Baxter who gets a visit from God, who asks him to build an ark for an upcoming flood. The movie must have seemed like a good idea at the time since it had more than double the budget of Bruce Almighty, but the biblical comedy bombed despite being the most expensive comedy ever made at that time. It received a 23% on Rotten Tomatoes and was the furthest thing from a hit. It remains to be one of the biggest box office bombs in history thanks to its insane budget. The budget for this movie, drumroll please, was $175 million and they only earned back $174. Not even breaking even. Ugh, that kills me. I'm sorry, but come on. You should have known you could not compete with Jim Carrey's Bruce Almighty. Next up at number 9 is Catwoman. Halle Berry had the chance to take on the superhero role, probably not knowing that it would become legendary for how bad it was. It was originally supposed to be a spin-off of Batman Returns, with Michelle Pfeiffer returning to play the hero, but they reworked it into a standalone movie and gave the part to Halle instead. She won the Razzie for Worst Actress and accepted it in person with her Best Actress Academy Award in her hand, just to remind everyone that she's not this bad. The movie's budget was $100 million and they weren't even close to breaking even, only earning back $82 million of that. What a waste. Sliding into number 8 is Zeroville. After landing himself in some serious scandals, James Franco took some years off from acting, but made his return in 2019 with this movie. The film was created by him, and he also starred alongside big names like Megan Fox, Seth Rogen, and Joey King. It's hard to say what about the film made it so terrible, but after being released in some theaters, it received a ton of negative reviews. The movie was nominated for 3 Golden Raspberry Awards and was one of the biggest box office flops of that year. It was the worst for James's career, let's just say that, and it made a total of $78,000. $78,000. I mean, we gotta compare that to what James usually makes in his movies, which is like millions. That's a rough go. Rolling into the number 7 spot is Jupiter Ascending. The people behind this movie were also behind The Matrix, so it wasn't expected to be such a big flop. Jupiter Ascending was meant to launch a brand new sci-fi franchise, hoping that it would be an epic one. It also had 2 huge stars as the lead, Channing Tatum and Mila Kunis. Some people praised the movie for having cool special effects and a unique storyline, but it barely managed to break even with its big $179 million budget. It made back $182 million, so only profited a couple $1,000,000, which for us is like, whoa, I'll take a couple $1,000,000, but for them, it's nothing. It also received a 27% on Rotten Tomatoes. Although I gotta say, seeing Channing Tatum and Mila Kunis paired up for a movie was kind of exciting. For me anyways. Coming to the number 6 spot is Holmes and Watson. Speaking of another exciting pair, this one had 2 of the funniest guys in Hollywood, but somehow was still a major flop. Will Ferrell and John C. Reilly teamed up to play the famous detective duo, but the comedy spoof was dubbed by many critics as the worst film of 2018. Their budget was only $42 million and they made back $41.9 of that, just shy of breaking even. Turns out that the movie was actually so bad, Sony tried to sell distribution rights to Netflix, but Netflix declined. They did not want it. The New York Times Review was also recommending to audiences that they sneak booze into the theaters to make it tolerable. It's hard to believe that this movie would be so bad with this kind of duo. I mean, these guys killed it in Step Brothers, so I don't know what happened with this one. We've made it halfway and we have From Justin to Kelly. Remember that time when Kelly Clarkson acted in a movie? Yeah. It was after the first season of American Idol was a huge hit and she won the top prize with Justin Guarani taking second place. So what better idea than to make a musical comedy and feature both of them in it? Sadly, it did not succeed in the musical genre or the comedy category. Critics tore apart the script, said the choreography was bad, and just said that it was not a good way to showcase 2 rising musical stars. Their budget was $12 million and they only made back $4.9 million. million. It also received a 10% on Rotten Tomatoes, and to this day, Kelly Clarkson says that she regrets doing the movie. When asked about it, she said, "When I won, I signed that piece of paper and I could not get out of it." Girl, I get it. Moving on to number 4, we have Good Luck Chuck. Dane Cook was one of the hottest comedians at the time, but he was never able to turn his fame into a successful movie career. He tried though, with Good Luck Chuck being one of his attempts. It was a good effort though. He was paired up with Jessica Alba for the lead roles in the movie. But the movie didn't make audiences laugh like his comedy normally did, and only received 5% on Rotten Tomatoes. That has been the lowest rating on our list so far. It did earn some money at the box office, but made it on several.
In at number 3, Avengers Endgame. Endgame was a box office hit with audiences around the world, and with something that valuable, you know Disney Plus is going to make sure that no one else gets a piece of it. Unlike many recent movies from the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Avengers Endgame will never stream on Netflix, like ever. Instead, it will go straight to Disney's new streaming platform, Disney Plus, and stay there forever. The film was released in theaters back in April, and by July, it had become the highest grossing film of all time, thus finally dethroning the James Cameron classic Avatar.
Taking over second place on our countdown is Transformers: The Last Knight. It's hard to believe that a Transformers movie would flop, seeing as the franchise has had massive success overall. And to be fair, it wasn't a complete fail when it comes to money, because it did earn over $600 million at the box office, but that is not the only factor that decides if a movie is good or not. This was the 5th installment of the franchise and ended up losing Paramount $100 million because of their budget. It only scored 15% on Rotten Tomatoes, and critics claim that this was by far the worst one of the series. The movie is criticized for being confusing, too loud, mean-spirited, and overall just ridiculous. Honestly, not gonna lie, I kind of stopped watching them because they got worse over time, in my opinion. Winning the number 1 place is Cats. This movie was highly anticipated ever since they first announced that they were going to make this live action version with all of Hollywood's biggest stars. Seriously, like this movie was packed with celebrities. I think that's why we all thought there was no way that it could fail. Their budget was $95 million and only made back 74 of it. But not only was it a box office flop, the audience was super disappointed with the outcome. It only got a 21% on Rotten Tomatoes. I just have to say, I don't know why someone ever thought that this was gonna be a good idea. You can pack a movie with all these celebrities, but when they are dancing and they're trying to sing in these weird cat outfits, it's just, oh, I don't know why you thought this was gonna be a hit. It just kills me.
And at number 10, Zero Dark 30. Catherine Bigelow's Zero Dark 30 portrayed the story of the US military finding and killing Osama bin Laden. The tactics that were shown in the film made it very controversial, specifically showing what the military and CIA did to their prisoners when they want information, specifically showing waterboarding in some scenes in an attempt to gain information about where bin Laden was hiding. Showcasing these scenes sparked a debate, with some claiming the creators of the movie were actually endorsing these tactics. The only Academy Award the film received was for Best Sound Editing, even though it was nominated in multiple huge categories. Many Oscar pundits believe the controversy derailed the film's awards chances, since it was one of the standout movies from that year that is still beloved to this day. And at number 9, American Pie. American Pie is a classic teen movie that's almost like a rite of passage these days, but this film was almost seriously stunted with an NC-17 rating. The creators of the film set out to make it for teenagers, so it was of vital importance that teens could go see it in theaters. Jason Biggs recalled that 4 different versions of the movie were sent to the Motion Picture Association of America to get a rating, and they all came back as NC-17, which is not what they wanted. The main issue with the movie was the infamous scene with the pie, if you know, you know. The MPAA board was basically stumped on how to deal with it, since the scene had no prior precedent. The filmmakers pushed for a solution on how to bring the rating down to an R, and the association came up with one. In the end, they agreed to the R rating only if the number of thrusts from Biggs into the pie were fewer than previously shown. Yep, that's right, they put a limit on the number of thrusts. And at number 8, The House That Jack Built. This film was allegedly so nasty it made hundreds of people walk out of the theater at the Cannes Film Festival world premiere. This rumor has been denied by a lot of the critics that were in attendance, but it didn't stop the movie from becoming infamous. This started the controversy that would make it 2018's most controversial film. Some of the worst scenes included a duck's leg being brutally cut off, something animal activists like PETA were vocal against. Thankfully, it was later revealed that it was a prop and not a real animal. The movie also included extreme and unnecessary violence towards women, which made it particularly hard for women to watch. All in all, it's still considered one of the most shocking movies of all time.
Number 7. Jennifer Aniston. If you haven't seen Leprechaun yet, I'll get you up to speed. The 1993 horror about a little Irish monster who just wants to get his pot of gold stars Jennifer Aniston a few years before she became super famous on Friends. Aniston has made it clear that she would rather forget this movie ever existed, and it's probably for good reason. We'll never know if she ever watched the movie when it was released, but while speaking with People magazine in 2019, she revealed that her ex-husband Justin Theroux forced her to sit through it on one particular night. I watched it like 8 years ago with our mutual friend Justin Theroux. We were dating. It was one of those things when I tried to get that remote out of his hand and there was just no having it. He was like, no, this is happening. And she went on to claim that she couldn't sit through it and just kept walking in and out of the room because she was cringing so much. She also added that she recognizes that the film is a cult classic and that when she filmed it, she was still starting out as an actress and she couldn't believe she was actually starring in a movie. So it's nice to see that she was able to find the silver lining.
And at number 6, The Human Centipede II. It's understandable why this movie is on this list, because I'm sure it still gives some viewers nightmares. The first movie was bad enough, but if you can believe it, the sequel was even worse. 2 years after the original, the creator developed the sequel, making it even more disgusting than the first. The meta-sequel follows a mentally ill man who becomes so obsessed with the first movie that he decides to embark on his own mission to create a human centipede. Obviously as disturbing as it gets. This film is so disturbing it was banned and or censored in various cities around the world. Critics have repeatedly called it one of the most reprehensible films ever made. Let me know below if you've watched any of the movies. I thankfully have not and probably never will. Halfway number 5, The Hunt. This is one of the more recent movies in this list, with The Hunt being released in 2017, but the movie has deep political ties which made it incredibly controversial. It was actually removed from its September 27th release date because it was in the middle of so much scandal. Firstly, the promotion of the film was halted after mass casualty events in Dayton, Ohio and El Paso, Texas. Many felt that promoting a movie like The Hunt was out of touch for the time. The second scandal was surrounding the contents of the film. Specifically, the plot seems to accuse Democratic politicians of having terrible intentions for the American people. The plot of the film centers around Americans getting hunted for sport by the elites of America, including politicians. In the script, one of the politicians referred to the hunted as, quote, deplorables. It turns out that this was the word Hillary Clinton infamously used to describe Trump supporters. Conservatives lashed out against the hunt, with Donald Trump even weighing in and calling the hunt very dangerous to our country. The movie was later released in March 13th of 2020. And at number 4, The Interview. Even before the trailer of this movie was released, it was widely considered controversial based on the plot. The movie was about two American journalists played by Seth Rogen and James Franco, who set up an interview with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, then get recruited to aid in his death. Even stranger, this whole thing was supposed to be a comedy. The outrage against the film got so bad that anonymous hackers decided to hack Sony in 2014 to stop the release of the film. The general consensus around Hollywood is that North Korea hacked the studio in reaction to The Interview. Sony was so nervous after that hack, they decided not to premiere the movie in theaters nationwide. Instead, they put it on demand so people could still buy the movie if they wanted to see it. I am absolutely sure the studio considered scrapping the movie altogether. And at number 3, The Joker. The Joker is another one of those movies that sparked controversy the moment it was announced, which only got worse after the release of the trailer. Although critics loved the film, and it gained accolades for director Todd Phillips and actor Joaquin Phoenix. The main criticism of the movie was the depiction of violence in the film, as well as the circumstances that made the audience feel bad for the Joker at some points. Director Phillips defended the gore in the film, saying that showing PG versions of death is worse than his movie. People were also concerned that the movie could spur real-world violence. At least one showing of the film in LA was cancelled over opening weekend due to a legitimate threat. But that did not stop people from showing up to the rest of the screenings, making The Joker a box office success, and ended up grossing over $1 billion at the box office. And at number 2, Mother. This movie was not only controversial, it was confusing and was rated poorly by critics. The film starred Jennifer Lawrence, who was at the height of her career at the time, but unfortunately this movie put a huge dent in her reputation. After it premiered at the 2017 Venice Film Festival, it became an instant talking point, with many critics not sure how the reception would be. The final 20 minutes of the movie basically reenacts all of history in the small house, making it one of the more jaw-dropping sequences. Not only did fans dislike the confusing plot, but the violence towards the main character, Jennifer Lawrence, was seen as unnecessary and harmful to women everywhere. A poster for the film featuring Lawrence's bruised face was widely criticized for glorifying violence against women to market the movie. And finally, number 1, Nina. Cynthia Morta's 2016 biographical drama, Nina, got so much backlash it's a shock it was ever released. The movie portrayed the life of civil rights activist Nina Simone, but Nina and her family were vehemently against the movie. It also got backlash for casting Zoe Saldana in the role of Nina and darkening her skin tone to appear more like Nina in real life. Tons of fans and other celebrities spoke out against this use of blackface, including Grammy winner India Air, who wrote a damning op-ed for The Hollywood Reporter about the film's use of dark makeup. Nina's family did not keep their hatred for the movie to themselves, and they were openly against it, even telling fans of Nina's to boycott the movie. Her family made a public statement which told Saldana to, quote, "Please take Nina's name out of your mouth for the rest of your life."
In at number 10, The Wrong Missy. Once Adam Sandler and his company Happy Madison changed from theatrical releases to just being another comedy film on streaming platforms, they really seem to lack any worth or value now. In fact, this really just looked like a poor excuse for a vacation. The script was packed with very easy setups and jokes that do nothing to challenge your intelligence nor your attention. Perhaps the only person in the film that gave more than a lackluster performance was Lauren Lapkus. She fully throws herself into this type of comedic insanity that stems from the scenarios built around her character. It works, but unfortunately it's brought down heavily by poor performances from supporting cast members. In terms of plot progression, it's far too predictable and runs the same course as every single other bad Happy Madison movie. In at number 9, Spencer Confidential. Starring Mark Wahlberg, this is your typical Mark Wahlberg film. He's an ex-convict, former Boston police cop who basically plays by his own rules, which bizarrely include him beating the ever-living crap out of a commanding officer because he suspected that the guy beats his wife. No evidence, just a feeling in his belly. With so much police brutality in the news these days, Spencer Confidential has slowly edged itself into the worst of the worst category. The plot is a big bumbling mess that throws its viewers through various grisly flashbacks, and the story ultimately will leave you with some serious deja vu. It's as if they took a copy of what an action script looks like, just lazy writing that leads to a film you'll probably put on as background noise. In at number 8, Feel Good. Recovering addict and comedian May tries to control the addictive behaviors and intense romanticism that permeate her life. Her efforts are then complicated by a new and all-consuming relationship with her girlfriend George. Also, do not be confused by the title. Feel Good is both a comedy and a drama, and certainly will not make you feel good at times. It does, however, offer a dynamic that allows for some fascinating introspection. As George battles with the fluidity of the sexuality spectrum, May struggles with her gender identity. While they're supposed to be love interests, May and George's relationship comes across as simply a vehicle specifically engineered to explore the things that I mentioned earlier, rather than just having a genuine romance that speaks for itself. Their performances are not terrible by any means, but there certainly is more awkward scripting moments that come off as not believable. In at number 7, Love, Wedding, Repeat. Love, Wedding, Repeat is the latest rom-com to hit Netflix, but unfortunately you won't love, you won't want to be bonded to, and you won't ever want to repeat this viewing experience ever again. It has moments of being a charming wedding farce until the incomprehensible twist that hits about 40 minutes before the ending. Although Love, Wedding, Repeat is not nearly as confusing as it is purely just lazy. With a better script that actually took the time to tell its audience why it's leading into the cosmic and supernatural, Love, Wedding, Repeat could have been a real delight. Instead, it's just very perplexing. In at number 6, The Main Event. As you watch this movie, you can tell that they were trying to explain the amount of heart and discipline that it takes to make it into the WWE, but at the end of the day, it's still all about a kid wearing a magical mask. It essentially is a copy and paste of the movie Like Mike, except every basketball reference was changed to wrestling. In the film, an 11-year-old superfan named Leo gains super strength from this mask that he uses to become a wrestling phenom. This fantasy film from director Jay Karras, as harmless as it may be, becomes so over the top when it gives these abilities to one lucky preteen, instead of making a film about the hard work that is intrinsic with wrestling. At the end of the day, it truly shows that the WWE is open and willing to sacrifice its own core values for lazy, family-friendly amusement. And at number 5, Coffee and Kareem. This Netflix comedy was so terrible that even Peter Travers of Rolling Stone gave it a measly 1 star. Moreover, it received scathing reviews from many critics. Peter titled his review Coffee and Kareem, a crime against comedy. Ed Helms only has himself to blame for this disastrously bad flop. I mean, Oof, right? Like, what? That's a savage take. I don't even think I can be that mean. What's really bad about this movie is that we have so many better things to compare it to, so it always falls short. In fact, even Stuber was able to do a better job with their mismatched buddy cop duo movie. Coffee and Cream, on the other hand, feels like a clumsily put together action film with any ounce of clever dialogue just being thrown out the window. They try too hard to pay homage to the older genre of action films in a humorous way that just leaves nothing for audiences. And by nothing, I mean this shouldn't even be considered a movie. And number 4, The Letter for the King. The Letter for the King will certainly have a more forgiving audience with younger viewers, especially if they don't recognize all of the dramatic beats that are coming. Plus, the character details and general plot directions are just far too predictable. As far as quests go, the movie will test the limits of distracting you with entertainment that is too familiar to be fun. An element of magic is thrown into the movie, which includes a jaw-dropping battle at the climax that looks like it was inspired by a video game. Sadly, even with all of the magic, the film is dominated by mediocrity. Overall, the film tries to be different while being all too familiar and therefore pales in comparison to the fantasy stories that we're used to seeing.
Worst film of the year lists. Many reviews said that Dane should just stick to voiceover work and his comedy skits. I agree. He is a good comedian. Cruising into number 3 is The Lone Ranger. Disney went all in with this one when they wanted to make a reboot of The Lone Ranger. They threw in a huge budget of $250 million and put Johnny Depp as the lead. They were hoping that this one would replicate the same success of Pirates of the Caribbean, so they actually hired the original Pirates director and screenwriters too. On top of their massive budget, they also spent a whopping $150 million on marketing costs, like on top of the 250. So we know that they were trying really hard to make this one a hit, but the gamble with all of their spending did not pay off. Critics and audiences found the movie was too dark, too violent, and way too long. The movie ended up costing Disney $160 million, so that took a huge loss, to say the least.
In at number 2, A Fall from Grace. Coming in at a stunningly low 70% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, A Fall from Grace is Tyler Perry's first movie for Netflix, which also may be why it feels like it lacks a certain amount of polish that usually happens with his prolific films. While the performances are stronger and the narrative is better than some of his other previous films, Perry's latest still features many problems. Overall, it had dizzy swings in tone, bizarre blocking for scenes, poor lighting at times, and jarring edits that make you wonder how it was ever even released. It feels like one of those films that you have to watch in a theater just to have the experience made better by fellow audience members shouting at the screen. If you're really paying attention to what's happening in the film, you'll figure out what's going on pretty quick, and it won't deviate from that path to mediocrity. Last but certainly not least, on our number 1 spot, The Last Thing He Wanted. More like The Last Thing We Wanted. The Last Thing He Wanted is confusing to an almost impressive degree. Typically, when a narrative gets out of control, it will at least try to overcorrect itself at some point before the end. Unfortunately, this never happens. This anti-thriller freely mixes hardworking journalism and weapons smuggling that continues to blaze its own path of nonsense right up until its disastrous ending. There's even this uncharacteristically slow shot that apparently had an audience at the Sundance Film Festival laughing out loud. Overall, this incoherent adaptation of John Didion's novel about a journalist is the last thing any of us wanted to see.
Kicking off our countdown at number 10 is Dolittle. After Robert Downey Jr. took on the hero role of Iron Man in the most popular franchise in the world, people were wondering what he could do next after his character left. Most people definitely didn't expect him to take on the role of Dolittle in the retelling of the classic story. Unfortunately, the movie did not do very well, and critics were quick to rip it apart. Peter Bradshaw from Guardians wrote, "This is the family movie we didn't know we needed, because we didn't. It really is horrible, inert, and every time Downey opens his mouth to say something unintelligible, the film dies a bit more." That is actually one of the nicer reviews too, if I'm being honest. The movie received only 15% on Rotten Tomatoes and was also a total box office flop, earning $61.8 million, but apparently had $115 million in global marketing costs alone. Just marketing costs. Coming in next is The Last Thing He Wanted. The political drama seemed to have a lot going for it, including a killer cast like Anne Hathaway and Ben Affleck. It was an adaptation of the 1996 novel and was released to Netflix, which made it easier for everyone to watch it. But that might be the only positive thing about the movie. The screenplay itself was ripped to shreds by every critic, the majority of them agreeing with the fact that it was just bad. Isaac Feldberg from Fortunes wrote, "The Last Thing He Wanted is almost impressively bad. It begins in a state of near total incoherence and somehow meanders further from there, plunging into almost experimental territory with its choppily edited mess of ridiculous dialogue and hyper-dense plotting. The movie was one of the first ones in 2020 and hit theaters on January 27th, earning a whopping 6% on Rotten Tomatoes. Sniping the number 8 spot is Brahms' The Boy 2. The first movie, titled The Boy, came out back in 2016, and most people were excited to find out that there was a sequel. For those who never saw the first one, it told the story of a killer doll who guards the house that it lives in, and it had one of the most shocking twist endings that we've seen in more recent years. But viewers were very disappointed after seeing the sequel, which only got a 10% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. Benjamin Lee from The Guardians wrote a review and said, "There's something willfully unscary about The Boy 2. It's so punishably dull to watch, filled with dry, perfunctory dialogue from Stacey Manners consistently, uninventive script, and shot without even a glimmer of style that even at a brisk 86 minutes, it feels like unending torture." In the number 7 spot is Sonic the Hedgehog. Back in 2019, the trailer dropped for the new animation movie, and people were quick to tear it apart, saying they hated it and that it looked nothing like the original animation they were hoping for. So the movie was postponed, and they completely redid the entire design and movie, which we have to give them some credit because that is some serious dedication. On November 12th, Jeff Fowler and Ben Schwartz happily announced the arrival of the new Sonic. People were thrilled with the new design and were finally excited to see the movie. But once the movie came out, it did not receive the best reviews, and people said the 6-month delay fixed the design, but it did not fix how bad the movie was itself. Cruising into number 6 spot is The Turning. The movie seemed like a good idea on paper when creating an adaptation of the classic Henry James novel, The Turn of the Screw. It was produced by the one and only Steven Spielberg, so it was bound to be nothing but another success to add to his list. But critics were disappointed and called the movie incomprehensible. David Nusser from Real Film Reviews called The Turning, I quote, "an absolutely abhorrent ghost story, an excessively deliberate drama that's almost entirely devoid of dread and atmosphere, an almost uncommonly intolerable contemporary horror flick." The movie definitely had a lot of potential from the outside looking in, but viewers claimed it was a waste. The Rotten Tomato judges also slammed it, and it earned a massive 12%. Steven Spielberg, 12%? That is crazy. We are halfway through our list, and we have Fantasy Island. Some people were really excited to see the classic 70s television series be recycled and turned into a modern movie. The movie had Blumhouse behind it, which usually means that there's a solid horror thriller coming our way. But it's also a big risk, seeing as the series ended long before most of the movie's target audience was even born. The movie was one of the most brutally reviewed movies of this year, so far. People were calling it gallingly stupid, and that was one of the nicer remarks. One critic, Jason Schwan from Nashville Scene, said, "This film is such a haphazard stack of nested fantasies, it could be a Cinemax After Dark film if it took any joy in anything. Blumhouse's Fantasy Island is an incoherent mess, and it's effing exhausting." And just for fun, let me add in that the film only got an 8% on Rotten Tomatoes, not even in the double digits. We are here now at number 4, and we have Like a Boss. The movie was stacked with a killer cast, but it failed to capitalize on that fact. Tiffany Haddish and Rose Byrne seemed like the perfect pair to make the audience laugh and bring in some good reviews, but it didn't work out that way. And people had no problem pointing out that fact. Alison Wilmore from Vulture said, "How do you make a movie with this cast and have it be so devoid of joy? It's hard to guess whether the story was mangled by the studio's Reddits or just didn't have much to say to begin with. Both seem possible. The bigger question is why so many strong actors signed on for this misfire. It feels like a film whose point is clumsy, misunderstood by the very people who created it." This one is a real shame in my opinion because it had a lot of potential. I love Tiffany Haddish. However, it only got 20% on Rotten Tomatoes.
In at number 3, The English Game. The English Game depicts the early origins of football and how it united players from across different socioeconomic backgrounds. The critics did not hold back with their reviews though, calling it a middling and joyless series. Lucy Mangan, who writes for The Guardian, said, "The latest infection site is The English Game. It is about football, it is about the inflection point in the game when it went from being one codified unified and played by Pashos to one that was dominated by and united the common man. It is Downtown Abbey for the boys. It is terrible. That is, if they could just take that comment out, it is Downtown Abbey for the boys. It is terrible. Yikes, that's a bad review.
Taking over the number 2 spot is The Jesus Rolls. The movie was centered around Jesus Quintana from The Big Lebowski, which sounds like a pretty decent idea for a new movie. The movie took a lot of time to make, but unfortunately it took a hard turn into a more cartoonish aspect of the character and ruined a lot of potential that it originally had. One critic from FlickFeast said, "The Jesus Rolls throws a gutterball down the farcical greasy lane in an unimaginable sex buddy road flick where the thin layer juvenile raunchiness is a strikeout of the unwanted kind." Let's just say that fans who waited a long time for the flick were super disappointed when they finally got to see it. And of course, the Rotten Tomatoes rating is 23%. In our number 1 spot is Birds of Prey. This one will probably bring up mixed emotions for some people because it really did have mixed reviews. Depending on who you talk to, some people will say they absolutely loved it, while others will say it absolutely sucked. On Rotten Tomatoes, it did earn 78%, which is a really good rating, and you can't say that Margot Robbie's performance was not killer. But there's a lot of people online who said they weren't into the movie plot itself and called it irrelevant. Peter Travers from the Rolling Stone wrote, "Slapping the topical theme of female empowerment on a story that trucks in business as usual violence does not qualify as a game changer." Of course, I loved the idea of it being a female-based hero movie, but not everyone was a fan.
In at number 10, Holmes and Watson. Back in 2018, Sony released this comedy film in theaters starring the usually well-paired Will Ferrell and John C. Reilly. In the film, they played Sherlock Holmes and Watson respectively, but in a much more absurd way than you're used to ever seeing these characters. According to Deadline, the test scores for the movie were so bad that Sony felt that they had a flop on their hands. Then when they tried to sell it to Netflix, the company just decided that they didn't even want it, even though Netflix pretty much keeps everything. And the fact that they never really share their viewership, like they keep that data a secret, so it's weird that they would publicly say like, "This is too bad, we don't even want it." So you know it must have been pretty bad considering that not even this content giant wants any piece of that film on their platform. I mean, Netflix does have a lot of terrible movies in their archive, so perhaps the real reason was the price tag. The film ended up costing $42 million to make, so you do the math on how much Sony probably wanted to sell it for. In at number 9, The Legend of 420. Now this is the first one on this list of this kind, but there will be more. Due to the content within a movie called The Legend of 420, aka drug use, some countries will push back on Netflix to have it banned in their country. So that means if you live in North America or somewhere more tolerant to recreational medicine, then you will actually get to see this film. What's funny is that the film is simply a comedic documentary that actually outlines the progression of the cannabis industry. It shows all of the, positive impacts, both financially and culturally, that marijuana has had so far. Although for some countries, they still implore the old adage of just say no. So to be more specific, the film was banned in Singapore because the government did not want any positive promotion of something that they deem illegal. You can understand that. In at number 8, The Big Lebowski. The Big Lebowski has endured a very on-again, off-again relationship with Netflix. It was cut in early 2015, only to be restored a few months later. However, by the end of the year, it was once again unavailable. It made a brief comeback in 2016, but then again by 2017, it was left out of their content bank. The bizarre thing with this film is that they sometimes actually showcase it, and then it'll be gone before you know it. Currently, The Big Lebowski is available on Prime Video UK, and for Hulu subscribers, though, they'll have to require a Stars channel add-on to watch the film, which is like an extra $9 a month, I think. In the film, Jeffrey the Dude Lebowski is a middle-aged bachelor with a love for cannabis and bowling, so you can see why Netflix plays kind of fast and loose with their relationship to this film. It's a huge hit in North America, so they still want to make that kind of money, but some countries still have very tight restrictions on this type of content. In at number 7, The Bridge. The Bridge is a 2006 British-American documentary film by Eric Steele spanning 1 year of filming at the famed Golden Gate Bridge, which crosses the Golden Gate entrance to San Francisco Bay. The film offers a controversial and graphic look into the many jumpers who take their life each year by jumping from San Francisco's Golden Gate Bridge. While the documentary had garnered mixed reviews, some critics described it as a scenic snuff film and possibly the most morally loathsome film ever made. According to a recent report from Netflix head office, they said in 2015 we compiled with a written demand from the New Zealand film and video labeling body to remove the bridge from the service in New Zealand only. The film is even classified as objectionable in that country. In at number 6, Night of the Living Dead. Netflix says in 2017 that it complied again with a written demand, this time by the German Commission for Youth Protection, to pull the classic black and white horror film. strangely, we can't seem to find Germany's official rationale for the decision anywhere online. The country has been known to exercise extreme censorship in the past when it comes to any sort of Nazi themes or symbolism, but it's unclear if that is the issue with Night of the Living Dead. Luckily, this movie is in the public domain, which means everyone can watch it online now, but it's just incredible that an almost 50-year-old movie is still banned, especially one of the greatest movies ever made. There's not even that much gore in this movie, also it's in black and white, so even less gore to be seen. In number 5, Full Metal Jacket. This film takes place during the Vietnam War under the ruthless command of Hartman. His control causes a few recruits to face mental breakdowns, and after a bizarre event, the soldiers are left to deal with the war's hellish mayhem. Netflix says that it pulled Full Metal Jacket from the Vietnamese version of its streaming service in 2017 at the request of the Vietnamese Authority of Broadcasting and Electronic Information. The American-made film, which was released shortly after the end of the Vietnam War, is seen by some as controversial for the way that it depicts the Vietnamese. In number 4, The Central Park 5. This documentary examines the case of 5 teenagers, all African American or Latino, who were convicted of the brutal attack on a white woman in 1989. The documentary originally aired in 2012 and actually was on Netflix, but was removed on July 1st, 2016. Perhaps the main reasoning for this was Amazon buying the rights to it, but it actually ended up working out better for Netflix. Instead of having just the documentary on their database, Netflix actually funded a brand new TV series called When They See Us. This limited series spans a quarter of a century from when the teens are first questioned about the incident in the spring of 1989, going through their exoneration in 2002, and ultimately the settlement reached with the city of New York in 2014.
Winning our 3rd spot on this countdown is The Grudge. If you are a horror fan like me, then you are probably thrilled to know that there was a new Grudge movie coming out this year. The 2004 movie was one of the most popular scary films we saw that decade, so the reboot in 2020 edition was supposed to be just as promising. I'm really irritated that I had to put it on this list. But many people considered the movie a flop, and it didn't help that it only got a 20% on Rotten Tomatoes. The movie didn't have much from the original plot or any real scares in general, people said. Paul Whittington from The Independent was one of the many critics to point out that there seemed to be a lack of effort put into the film. He wrote, "This is shoddy stuff, full of J-horror cliches and supposed jump scares you can see coming from a mile off. It's not particularly frightening, but it sure is depressing."
In at number 2, The Last Temptation of Christ. Anytime that you play around with the image of Jesus, you are sure to rile up some religious communities. Martin Scorsese's take on the story of Jesus, played by Willem Dafoe, resulted in protesters showing up at premieres and calling the project offensive. In Savannah, Georgia, the county commission even passed a resolution against the film. The movie would also trigger protests in places like Oklahoma, Texas, and many other small cities in the US. And perhaps the worst part is if you actually watch the movie, you can see how truly uncontroversial it really is. Yet, even so, theaters that showed the movie in Salt Lake City and Los Angeles were all vandalized. Even Martin Scorsese was targeted by death threats from TV evangelists. The threats were apparently so abhorrent that he required bodyguards during public appearances for several years following that. And in a statement released by Netflix, they said, "In 2019, we received a written demand from the Singapore Infocom Media Development Authority to remove The Last Temptation of Christ from the service in Singapore only because the film is banned in the country." Last but certainly not least, in our number 1 spot, The Last Hangover. The Last Hangover centered on the disciples waking up hungover and looking for Jesus. And The Last Hangover actually ended up winning a 2019 Emmy in the International Comedy category. It's very similar to The Hangover, except just with biblical characters instead. Religious folk really didn't like to see the apostles searching for a missing Jesus as they slowly pieced together their night of partying following the Last Supper. In a statement released by Netflix, they said, "In 2020, we complied with a written demand from the Singapore Infocom Media Development Authority to remove The Last Hangover from the service in Singapore only." Singapore, quit being a buzzkill, dude.
Number 10, Mark Wahlberg. M. Night Shyamalan's The Happening has been called one of the worst screw-ups of his career. But that obviously doesn't include The Last Airbender, which I'm sure fans of the original series would rather forget. So it's no surprise that Mark Wahlberg trashed this ridiculous movie even though he had the lead role. The film follows Elliot Moore, a Philadelphia high school teacher who tries to keep his wife safe during a global crisis in which plants spread a neurotoxin that causes humans to take their own lives. Maybe it was something to do with photosynthesis, who knows. Wahlberg himself admitted that he had no idea what was happening in The Happening. He just took the role because he was tired of playing tough guys. Quote, "The Happening, F it. It is what it is, effing trees, man. You can't blame me for not wanting to try to play a science teacher. At least I wasn't playing a cop or a crook. Shyamalan responded to the actor's criticism in 2019, and he really took the whole thing like a champ, saying, quote, "It's totally his call, however he wants to interpret it. At least he has a good attitude about it." Number 9. Rooney Mara. The horror genre definitely isn't for everyone, just ask Rooney Mara. The actress starred in a 2010 remake of Nightmare on Elm Street, which currently holds a 15% on Rotten Tomatoes. So enough said there. It was a remake of the classic 80s horror movie of the same name, with the plot of the movie being centered around the infamous character Freddy Krueger. The actress basically said that it was something she didn't really want to do in the first place, and while speaking to Entertainment Weekly in 2011, she explained that it was just something she had to audition for, probably because her agent put her up for it, but unfortunately for her, she couldn't help but nail her audition. Quote, "You kind of learn to self-sabotage with things you don't want to get. Sometimes you don't want to get something, but you do a really good job and you get it anyway. That's kind of what happened with A Nightmare on Elm Street. In fact, Mara said that her experience working on A Nightmare on Elm Street was so bad that she wanted to stop acting forever. And because she felt like other projects were going to be similar, she wanted to pursue a different career entirely. I don't think that's even possible to trash a film more than that." Number 8. Dwayne Johnson. Movies based on video games are always hit or miss. If you're lucky, you'll get a Resident Evil. If not, you'll get 2016's Assassin's Creed with Michael Fassbender. So it could really go either way. It all comes down to whether or not the filmmakers understand the franchise, and if they have the ability to really pull it off. Dwayne Johnson's Doom was a major flop. To start off, the movie is about as 2000s as you can get, and not in a good way. The actor took to the stage at the Amway Arena in Orlando in 2008 and started dumping on the movie right away. Quote, "Did you ever see Doom? Well, you probably didn't, and it's okay because nobody else did either." It's pretty funny, but he wasn't wrong. Fans and critics alike thought the performances were awful, the action sequences were impossible to follow, and the violence was gratuitous. No wonder it sits at 18% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Number 7. Jingle All the Way. 10 minutes into the film Jingle All the Way, before we even learned the plot of the whole storyline, it would be exposed as we would learn that Arnold Schwarzenegger's character was a negligent father who didn't spend enough time with his family because he was too busy running a successful mattress company. While we continued on to watch the movie, we would realize that the whole thing was just one giant mess with no redeemable qualities. With there being a lot of violence and most of the film being pretty satire, the whole film just seemed to be a bit misguided when it came to the true spirit of Christmas. With a workaholic dad trying to make things up to his son, he promises to get his son the hottest toy of the season, which happens to be Turbo Man. And even though it's Christmas Eve, the toy is practically sold out. Arnold's character then tries to hunt down the toy when he runs into a mailman who happens to be on the same quest. With the clocks winding down, both men crack their moral codes before they start to learn the real meaning of Christmas. The movie initially was marketed as a family movie, but honestly isn't really aimed at kids as it's aimed more towards adults. For a Christmas movie, the film was also just a little too loud and violent, and the film was just more disturbing than it should have been for the Christmas season.
Number 6. Anna Taylor-Joy. This one is really confusing because horror fans and critics everywhere collectively agree that 2015's The Witch is a stellar movie. It really jump-started everyone's love for elevated horror when it came out with its anxiety-inducing story of a 16th century family banished to the edges of polite society who fall prey to the devil. It was the total opposite of the kind of cheap jump scare horror that we've been subjected to since the early 2000s. Anna Taylor-Joy has the lead role in the film, but according to her, the first time she watched it, she felt that not only would it come to nothing, but that it would actually destroy her career, which is crazy because it literally did the opposite. While speaking with IndieWire in 2021, the actress explained that she saw The Witch a couple of hours before the audience at the Cannes Film Festival, and it sent her into a spiral. Quote, "I was devastated. I thought I'd never work again. I still get shivers thinking about it. It was just the worst feeling of, I have let people down that I love most in the world. I didn't do it right." She even said that she cried after watching it just from the stress. Fans will agree that she's definitely being too hard on herself, because since the film's release, her performance has received nothing but praise. Number 5. Halle Berry. The actress brought the femme fatale comic book superhero to life in 2004's Catwoman, but ever since then she has been pretty open about how bad she thinks the movie really is. To give you some perspective, the movie earned a measly 9% on Rotten Tomatoes and was trashed by fans and critics alike. And in 2005, the movie earned her a Razzie Award for Worst Actress. And the best part is that Berry actually showed up to accept it and took the opportunity to dump on the film. Quote, "I want to thank Warner Brothers for casting me in this piece of god-awful movie. It was just what my career needed. I was at the top, now I'm at the bottom." The infamous speech was not only hilarious but actually earned her a lot of respect from fans, considering how many actresses would not be willing to make fun of themselves or call out a terrible movie that they've been in. She also said that she wanted to thank the writers, all 20 of them, which proved to everyone that she was not only witty but a really good sport about the whole thing, adding that it was what it was, but if she had the chance to do it again, she'd hope to make it better. Number 4. Channing Tatum. After being launched into fame from 2006's dance flick Step Up, Channing Tatum decided to take on a more action-packed role in 2009, and ended up snagging the lead role in the sci-fi military movie G.I. Joe: Rise of Cobra. This movie managed to rake in over $300 million at the box office and was extremely popular at the time, so you'd think Channing would be proud of it. But no, in fact the actor has been super vocal about how much he hates the film. In 2015, Channing told Howard Stern, quote, "I'll be honest, I effing hate that movie. I hate that movie, I was pushed into doing it." He went on to explain that after he filmed Coach Carter in 2005, Paramount signed him onto a 3-movie deal, which sounded like a dream at the time in his career, but the issue was that by the time the studio actually got around to filming G.I. Joe, 4 years later, Channing's Hollywood career had taken off, and he didn't want to make what he already knew would be a terrible movie, since at that time he could afford to be more selective with his projects. Number 3. Katherine Heigl. I think we all remember 2007's rom-com Knocked Up with Katherine Heigl and Seth Rogen. It was not just hilarious but very well received all round, scoring an 89% on Rotten Tomatoes and bringing in $219 million at the box office against a $25 million budget. But Katherine was less than thrilled about her participation in the movie, playing Allison, a rising journalist who gets knocked up after a drunk one-night stand with Ben, an irresponsible stoner. The actress has since called the film sexist, telling Vanity Fair in 2008 that she thought the movie, quote, "paints women as shrews, as humorless and uptight. It paints the men as lovable, goofy, fun-loving guys." She went on to say that she had a hard time with the film on some days because she said that her character was a B-word and a killjoy. But some have argued that that's exactly what makes the dynamic between the two lead characters work so well, because they need to be able to bounce off each other. Although to be fair, Katherine does seem to get typecast as the uptight, workaholic character an awful lot. Number 2. Shia LaBeouf. The Transformers franchise is known for its gratuitous action, crazy explosions, and bankable blockbuster hype. But there's a reason that its star Shia LaBeouf left the Michael Bay franchise after 3 films and later went on to denounce the movies altogether. For the first 3 installments, Shia played Sam Witwicky, the likable hero at the center of a battle between ancient alien robots that can disguise themselves as conventional vehicles. The movies were immensely popular worldwide, but that just wasn't enough for Shia to look back on them in a positive light. In an interview with Esquire in 2018, the actor expressed his distaste for the franchise that was a significant part of his adolescence. Quote, "My hang-up with those films was that they were irrelevant. They felt dated as F." He went on to compare the Transformers to movies with Robert De Niro and Martin Scorsese, where there is value in what they do. Quote, "It's very hard to keep doing what you're doing when you feel like it's the antithesis of your purpose on this planet." He's completely entitled to his opinion, but not every action movie has to have a deeper philosophical meaning. Sometimes it's just entertainment. Number 1. Robert Pattinson. This one is actually hilarious, because even though the Twilight movies have arguably made Robert Pattinson a star, the actor has been pretty honest about his feelings towards the movies and their source material. Long story short, he is not a fan. In a 2008 interview with E! News, Pattinson described Stephenie Meyer's book, which was basically the plot for the first movie, as a book that wasn't supposed to be published. Yes, he actually said that. And when asked about his character, the sparkly vampire Edward Cullen, the actor also had some issues there. In another interview that same year, this time for Empire magazine, Pattinson outright said he hated his character. Quote, "The more I read the script, the more I hated this guy. So that's how I played him, as a manic depressive who hates himself. Plus, he's a 108-year-old virgin, so he's obviously got some issues there." That's really funny, but while Stephenie Meyer may not be too pleased with his comments, it's good to see that he's not afraid to make fun of something that he's worked on.
Coming in at number 10 today, we have Love Actually. It's been a debate every Christmas season whether the movie Love Actually is good or bad. Released during the holiday season in 2003, rom-com writer Richard Curtis debut of the Christmas rom-com was a box office smash as it grossed in over $246 million globally against a $20 to $45 million budget. However, even though the film was such a hit in the box office, it didn't stop critics from ripping it apart every single Christmas season when it airs on TV. With the film containing a cast of several big-name stars, the film was marketed to be one of the best Christmas movies of the year when it was released, which makes you wonder why everyone hates the movie so much. Among Love Actually, more questionable politeness when Harry betrays his wife by purchasing a necklace for an employee, and the Prime Minister is also playfully wooing over the same employee, has conveyed some horrible messages when it comes to love. Also, the plot surrounding Jamie has also been criticized, as the character also falls in love with a woman he employs as a housekeeper who doesn't speak English. While it was meant to explore the idea of a mutual attraction between the two, it hasn't really sat well with feminist critiques. Aside from all the ethical concerns that the movie brings in, it's actually just a weird movie filled with a bunch of creepy characters that no one can really connect to. And number 9, The Princess Switch. With Netflix and Hallmark dominating the Christmas movie scene right now, they have this ongoing trend with movies that makes them become super cheesy fairy tales. While The Princess Switch has gone on to become one of the most talked about movies on social media, it's also been quickly regarded as one of the worst movies you'll either love or hate to watch every Christmas. Regardless of how bored we got watching this predictable movie, it seems like none of us could actually stop watching it. With the classic fairy tale story being overdone and becoming very mundane, the idea of a typical American baker from Chicago switching places with a royal duchess because they appear to be identical just seems too unrealistic. Also, we all couldn't stop pointing out that the storyline was oddly too similar to The Parent Trap, when both girls switched lives so the royal duchess could pretend to be a normal person before she got married to a prince. The overall movie just started to become extremely cringy, and the way the movie went on about handling Chicago's scenes just made it look like everyone in Chicago never layered up, and that everyone just wears hats and says Chicago all the time, which isn't really accurate. The Princess Switch had to be one of the cheesiest movies ever made, and it makes us all wonder why we even finished watching it in the first place, or why we even continue to watch the sequels. Hey Peaches, are you enjoying this video so far? If so, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Coming in at number 8, we have Santa's Sleigh. You probably could make a pretty entertainingly cheesy Christmas horror comedy from the idea of Santa's sleigh. The fact that Santa is actually the son of the devil, and he's out for revenge after being forced to deliver presents for the last 1,000 years after losing a bet and finally starts to revert back to his demonic self, was just a really weird take when it comes to a horror Christmas movie. The movie had the potential to do so much better. With this Yuletide horror movie, it was definitely just a major disappointment. If the movie used real actors who had a niche for comedic timing and the ability to write some pretty good jokes, then this movie actually could have been pretty good. However, without those things, this movie was actually just more painful to watch than you would expect. After the movie hit the box office, Bill Goldberg would join the legendary Hall of Fame of wrestlers who tried to make the transition into horrendous actors right alongside of Hulk Hogan and John Cena. Santa's Sleigh stands to be a cheap movie that really didn't provide us with the endless entertainment like we were expecting it to. And at number 7, Ghost in the Shell. This 2017 remake was a huge flop and almost didn't make it to theaters because of how much backlash it got for whitewashing the characters. This movie was massive in its native Asia, so Paramount decided to make an Americanized version of the movie to capitalize on the success, but it didn't end up that way. The production spent $110 million on the movie, but it tanked in the box office after Scarlett Johansson was cast in the lead. Many fans felt an Asian woman should have been cast in the role instead. Johansson and the filmmakers tried to spin the casting decision as justified, since Johansson's character is a cyborg and thus doesn't really belong to a specific ethnicity, but many fans did not buy it. The situation got worse when it was rumored that the editors planned to make Scarlett look more Asian in the final product. At first, Scarlett defended the casting decision, but after insane amounts of backlash, she apologized.
And number 6, Four Christmases. Despite having a strong cast for Four Christmases, it would become a sour holiday comedy that suffered due to a bad script, with the storyline focusing on a couple who plans an exotic vacation and it falls apart due to bad weather. The unmarried couple would have to be forced to spend the holiday season with their families. While Brad counts the hours down till he can escape his crazy relatives, Kate begins to wonder about her choices and ponders over the question on whether her family members are actually crazy after all. With the movie being better than most Christmas films made these days, Four Christmases still remains the type of film you should only watch when you're trapped on an airline and can't sleep during the holiday season. With the stars being charmless and the script being cheerless, even the supporting cast couldn't seem to figure out what they could bring to the table to make the film relatively better. The film was honestly just too sparse in comedy to really be successful, and at times the film was honestly just one giant mess. And number 5, Christmas Cupid. As the snow begins to fall and we're all starting to realize that Christmas is actually around the corner, we've all been pretty stressed out. As many of us want to relax and get into the Christmas mood, a lot of us have turned to Christmas movies to help us do so. However, if you're looking for a Christmas movie to get you into the Christmas spirit, maybe leave out Christmas Cupid off your list. With the film being a little bit silly to watch, it has pretty much become a holiday staple of bad Christmas movies. With the film being about a famous starlet that visits a Hollywood publicist to guide her to her true love, it's a spin-off on The Christmas Carol, and it could have been a great idea. I don't know whether if it was just the acting or the script, but the film definitely just came off a little too dry. Now, love stories during the Christmas season aren't a new thing in Christmas films, and they pretty much have become a staple for the holiday season over the last decade, which is probably the reason behind most of us being so tired of Christmas movies these days. With the film still being an adaptation of The Christmas Carol, the only differences between the two films is that instead of being visited by the ghost of Christmas past, present, and future, the main character is visited by her ex-boyfriends. While the film did have some decent acting, there are better versions of The Christmas Carol out there, so maybe opt to watch one of those instead. And number 4, I'll Be Home for Christmas. In the original 1998 film I'll Be Home for Christmas, a college student who is estranged from his father would be lured home to New York for Christmas after he was promised he would receive a classic Porsche as a gift. After the football team dumps Jake in the desert in a Santa suit, he would be left without identification or money to help him make the journey home. With his girlfriend not knowing where he is, she accepts a cross-country ride from Jake's rival. The film could have done better if the cast just had a little more to work with, since a lot of the dialogue sounds like they were just making things up on the spot in an attempt to try to make the movie something more than it already was. While the film was going to be a cliche either way, the way the film was sugar-coated with the attractive cast to draw in views was honestly just a disappointment. With the overall message stating that Christmas is not where you spend it or how you spend it, the movie would explain that the true reason behind Christmas is to bring your family together. With Jake wearing a Santa suit the entire movie, there is a possibility that there is an audience that likes this movie. However, I think majority of this film only appeals to people who fail to care if nothing good happens in a movie as long as just nothing bad happens in it. And at number 3, The Holiday Calendar. One of Netflix's original holiday films, The Holiday Calendar, ended up being such a cliche filled with terrible plot twists. If the movie title didn't already give it away, The Holiday Calendar is about a holiday advent calendar, but not just any boring Christmas advent calendar. This one apparently has magical Christmas powers. When a struggling photographer, Abby, decides to go home for Christmas,
Christmas, her grandfather would gift her an antique Christmas calendar that belonged to her late grandmother. Now, without spoiling too much in the movie, I will say the calendar seems to predict the future, and it causes Abby to embark on this magical Christmas journey, which would cause this movie essentially to become a sugar cookie. You know what you're exactly getting yourself into by watching the movie because it has all the right ingredients. It had the love, the magic, and presents, but the whole film could have been better if it just had the frosting on top. With the film being more restrained and more of a grounded movie when compared to other Christmas movies, it ultimately lost some of its candy-coated glee that made other Christmas movies so buzzed about when they were released. At number 2, A Christmas Detour. It seems like every year Hallmark releases a Christmas movie that makes us all want to run away as fast as we can, and A Christmas Detour is one of those movies, with the plot of the film being about two travelers becoming linked. When a snowstorm grounds their flight in Buffalo, Paige desperately needs to find a way to New York City to meet her fiance's parents, and it's up to Dylan, a fellow passenger and a guy she can't stand, to get her there. Hallmark has this idea that a good Christmas movie comes with a goofy script, irritating characters, and a very far detached engagement with characters, thinking that it will help us relate to them better. But it never does. With Paige's character being portrayed as this ditzy blonde, it pretty much came off to be quite annoying, and Dylan was frankly just boring to watch. If there was anything interesting to watch in the whole film, it was actually the unhappy married couple, Maxine and Frank. With poor CGI just inserted all into the film, like the holiday tree in the very beginning, it's very clear that everybody, including the director, were just going through motions on this one, and it could have been so much more if there was just a better script and proper direction. And at number 1 today, we have Black Christmas. One of the most boring Christmas movies I've ever had to watch was Black Christmas, which is pretty much disappointing because the way the horror film was marketed was definitely one giant way the industry catfished us into thinking that it was going to be a good film. Sometimes films should never be remade, and in this case, no one should ever try to remake the 1974 slasher film, as they would go on to ruin the horror movie for everyone. With the holiday film following a group of sorority sisters who become stranded at their campus during a snowstorm, they would soon find themselves being stalked by a man who didn't care if they were naughty or nice. With an attempt to build the franchise and bring back the legacy of the 1974 film had back into society, Black Christmas would instead just start to plummet. With the film lacking any sort of craft or talent, every piece of the film just fails. With it being overly exploitive and off-putting, it created an experience that made it pretty impossible to even justify what we were watching. With the original film being a cult classic, there was no reason to remake the film, and now it seems that the love we once had for it has just faded away.